Let us offer prayer together for immersing ourselves in words and concepts of Torah. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Wonderful. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, right now the temple is doing a few little drills around our fire system. So if you see flashing lights or if you hear strange sounds in the background, it's just a routine checkup and is all good. Sorry about that. The timing just lined up in such a way that that's going on right now. But I'm grateful to be here with all of you. And we're going to be looking at Parashat Shoftim. And the midah, or the soul trait of justice. So before we even dive into the text for today, and I know many of you may have read the commentary from the Musar Torah commentary, which is wonderful. But before we even dive into all of that, when you hear the word tzedek or the word justice, what comes to mind for you? What does that bring up?
To me, it's equality. First of all, just equal treatment.
Equal treatment, great. Anyone else? What does tzedek mean?
You have to repair the injured party.
Okay, so you're talking going into this idea of tikkun or repairing something that's broken.
Right.
I know it's not the actual definition of justice, but I think of honor.
Yeah, so last week, right? Last week we were talking about kavod, this idea of honor, and maybe there is a relationship between the two of them. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that relationship is in your mind, Jay?
Well, it's the same idea. The other word that came in my mind was mercy. Justice and mercy, justice with honor are just so intertwined sometimes when we think of the word justice. And for tzedakah, we think of it as honoring. It's our self-giving a chance to honor an organization to help.
Yeah, Tom.
Going along with what Jay was saying, I always equate it with justice, and what Larry mentioned, the administration of justice and fairness and equality, and there's a little distinction between those two, and then accomplishing that with compassion, justice, and implementing that with compassion, because there's, the enforcement of it is a whole nother issue. Beautiful.
And I mean, as we've talked about and has come up just about every week that we've studied Musar, so many of these soul traits are truly intertwined with one another. If you are leaning into one, you're also leaning into others. So it's so important to bring in all those pieces. Hi, Rabbi Catherine. Hi, Morris. Hi, Misty. As you're all kind of joining in here, if there's anything you want to add about what comes to mind for you as we think of the word justice or tzedek, that's what we're talking about. So we talked about equality and fairness. We've talked about the relationship with both mercy, rachamim, and also kavod, honor.
I guess I think of it more maybe mechanically, righting a wrong. Um,
Yeah, so that relates to the High Holy Day themes around Teshuvah, right? Repentance, in a way, might have a relationship there. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that one of the things in our world now is the idea of justice for all. So I don't think that the Torah really directs that, discusses that in the sense and the complexity of what we have in the world today. But we have far from justice for all.
And this kind of idea, right? Why is it that we protect the stranger? Because if one person if there's a person in the world who doesn't have justice, a person in the world who isn't given that kavod, that honor and dignity, then truly none of us really have it. If one person isn't free, none of us are free. Those kind of ideas, absolutely.
It's an ongoing struggle. It's never ending. It won't be resolved in our lifetimes. But I think through our descendants or people who don't have descendants but have contact with people, it will be pursued as long as we have conversations like this.
Exactly. And that is such a good segue, Irv, as well, right? Because indeed, some of the most important words from our Torah portion are tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. And as you'll see, there's a few commentaries about why it is that those words are repeated. Why say tzedek, tzedek? Why not just justice, you shall pursue? So here is the verse right in front of us, right? Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, Laman Tehiyah, justice, justice, you shall pursue that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God is giving you. So why do you think that this verse begins with a repetition of the word tzedek?
I've always felt it's probably, for me, the most important phrase in the whole Torah. It also reminds me of when God calls out Abraham not to slay Isaac. He says, Avraham, Avraham. So when God says something twice, that's not a mistake. It's not a misprint. God is telling us something is very, 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 very important. And you must listen and do it. Do justice, do justice.
So you're saying it's here because it's giving us emphasis. It's saying this is one of the most important things to devote your attention towards.
Absolutely. It goes across all spectrum of humanity. Justice. Justice for all.
Thanks, Larry. Great. Yeah, Marla, please.
This just came to me. How about if the word is repeated twice to give us some sort of indication that there might be more than one implication or one definition of it, that it means that we need to pursue it. I'm being repetitive there, sorry about that in the line, but to look at it maybe from different angles. In other words, from justice as a person who is in a position of judging, or justice in the position of someone who may be accused of doing something wrong.
That's so beautiful. And there could be many different applications to that. But it reminds me that recently I was talking to my son who is trying to decide what extracurricular to do after school. And there's so many different options. And eventually he decided that he wanted to do the debate club. And we had a discussion where he was saying, well, I want to learn how to make a persuasive argument for things that I believe in. And I said, okay, well, that's awesome. But just know you're also going to learn how to make a persuasive argument for things that you really don't believe in, and that's just as important. And having this in here at tzedek, like to see things from our own eyes, we know how to do that, right? Because we're in our own heads. Of course, we see things from our own eyes. But to have the gift of being able to see things through the eyes of someone that we don't agree with, or that it's not our perspective, that is perhaps one of the most important skills that we can really get. Yes, Sandy, please.
Well, also, in a way, you could have justice based on laws, but it may not be righteous. And that's why there's always that need to change and grow and change what the laws are. So that might be another reason why it's justice.
So you're saying it's there to tell us to keep growing with our understanding of justice?
Well, justice, if it's based on law, laws are not always necessarily applying to everyone as the world turns, and that's why our concept of justice needs to be changed to also include righteousness.
Beautiful. That's great. Is there anyone I'm missing? Irv?
Just a quick question. In the I'm always interested in the translation and the root, because I think we get into so much trouble by not really understanding what justice might have meant in the Hebrew language or on the way to English.
I think of something that used to be said someplace where I taught, which is repetition is conviction. It's like you need to, many of us, I don't really remember very much that I hear only once, but when you hear repetition, and in this case, that many people are discussing it as we are today, is that to hear different, especially if you're hearing new points of view, it's really helpful to hear it many times, more than once, and then to be able to discuss it.
So to have that reminder.
Yeah. Well, also, we always have to be saying Moses is going to be dead at the end of this part of the Torah. I mean, of course, you would reemphasize, hoping that people will carry them on into millennia.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Sandy, I see that your hand is up. I just want to go back to Irv really quickly first. Irv, you mentioned something about the translation. Was there a specific translation, a specific word you wanted to check in about?
Just the word justice. So what is the Hebrew? Is there a smooth transition? Does it really say justice? I mean, or is it something akin to justice?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So tzedek, it has similar words, right? The word tzedakah
That's
is the same word as tzedek, right? And very often people think of tzedakah as charity, and that's not what it is. Tzedek can also mean like righteousness. So there's always different ways to translate things. Justice, righteousness, doing what is right. It has that kind of a feeling to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that clarifies or just gives more questions, but there is that connection.
Rabbi, I wanted to, when I saw tzedek, I came a few minutes late. I apologize. I right away thought of the word tzedakah and just happened to look it up. And it says tzedakah is the Hebrew word for philanthropy and charity. Here's the thing. It is a form of social justice in which donors benefit from giving as much or more than the recipients. That's what this definition of tzedakah is. And I just thought
beautiful.
I'd bring that up because
absolutely. Thank you. So I want to give Sandy a chance to jump in and then we'll keep going. Go ahead.
I believe that somewhere in Kabbalah, it says something, what we do on earth actually affects heaven. So there are the earth realm and then there's the heavenly realm. And maybe that has something to do with justice.
Beautiful. And there are some Kabbalistic texts that speak exactly to that. So thank you for bringing that in. I only brought in a few small texts. There are so many more, and the comments that are given here speak to a lot of them. So your collective wisdom is really, really appreciated. Is there someone else who wanted to say something? Okay. Feel free to jump in if you do. One of the other questions that I had placed here was, why does God require us to have tzedek in order to live in the promised land? What is important about this being mentioned now? stumped everyone.
Well,
What?
one thing comes to my mind is that, it left a place where you didn't have justice, and it was not an easy transition. And it's an instruction. If you want to last long, or you don't want to drive people away, you have to have this element in the way you conduct your life, or country, or society, or whatever, culture, whatever word you want to plug in.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah, Misty and then Marla.
So a couple of things, when they came into the promised land, it was already occupied, right? You had the Canaanites here, you had all these people living there in their homes. And so I think it was a reminder to treat those people with justice, with righteousness, because God gave us the blessings of having that land. So don't take it for granted. Remember who it was that gave it to you, and behave accordingly. The other thing that I think is always stood out for me is the concept of social justice versus what I equate as secular justice. I mean, there's a significant difference in how the world at large looks at the institution of justice versus the understanding that we have in the Torah of social justice. And I think that is lost in a lot of scenarios today. And I think it's really important to highlight tzedak, which, you don't see that being emphasized in the more secular world that we have today. They talk about justice, but they don't talk about it in terms of righteousness and compassion and mercy. It's sort of goes back to your highlighting the issue with your son in terms of debate. I mean, people can debate really well and win something that may not be social justice in an argument.
Yeah, thank you so much, Misty. Absolutely. There's a lot to think about there. And some of your earlier comments we're going to come back to in a little bit as we look through a few different texts. So we're going to hold on to that. Yeah, Marla.
This may be pediatric on my part, but I'm just thinking back on either last week or the week before sermon that you gave, teaching us about the difference between how people treat one another, the heaven and hell, they're both in the same place. Remember, their arms didn't work, whatever. So I'm thinking, when answering this question, God requires us to do this because we're going to have to live differently in order to survive. And that difference, that living differently, means all the things that Misty just mentioned about treating others with respect and listening and understanding, and all the things that we're coming up with here.
Yeah, we're going from a group of people who have been wandering for the last 40 odd years to moving into a place where people are established, who already live there. So there's not only justice, because now we will probably end up having, just we've had the people who are the chiefs of tribes. Now we're going to have the people who are more wealthy in whatever ways wealth are. I mean, that is going to start to become a different kind of challenge for us than when we were moving. And also that food was provided every day. And it's up to, are we going to be fighting with the people whose land is theirs? We're the newcomers. How do we get along with them? How do we be just? What is their idea of justice?
So important. And this question that you raised, this question that also Misty raised a minute ago, we're going to be going to exactly that as we're going through these texts. It's not coming quite yet, but it is coming very, very soon. I promise. So let's look at just a couple of really quick commentaries, and you'll see a lot of what you said is reflected in what various rabbis have said about this repetition. We have Ibn Ezra, who said this is addressed to each of the contending parties. The repetition of justice implies that they should pursue a just result, whether it brings them profit or loss, or perhaps that they should continue to pursue justice time after time as long as they live, or it may simply be for emphasis. So Ibn Ezra is arguing with himself, right? He gives three different possibilities. One, we said, it's about emphasis. That came up a bunch of times, right? One is talking about whether it actually helps us or it doesn't help us. We pursue justice. It's not about us. It's about something bigger than us. Perhaps as you, Sandy, were talking about, that it has implications, it has ripples far beyond ours, perhaps in the heavens above. And then this other idea here, that we should continue to pursue justice time after time. It's not a one-time thing. It's not we're pursuing it today and tomorrow we can do whatever we want. No, it's this reminder, and I can't remember who spoke about this, but someone did talk about this, of, making sure that we are consistently pursuing justice on a regular basis, that we're always pushing what that means within ourselves. It might have been you, Sandy. So any comments on that before we look at a different commentary here?
I just have something that's come to thought since relooking at this issue. When you look at our lives, and even when you're studying Torah history, the judges or the judgments that are built into the system, whether it been the Sanhedrin or in our case the courts, if anything is going to solve our current problem, it's not going to be anything but the judiciary. The political part of it won't get solved, not in our lifetime, but the judiciary is there to make sure that we just don't go off the rails. And so I think there's examples of that in Torah, and we talk about Solomon being a great judge and coming up with solutions and things. But I've just popped into my thinking when we went over that.
Yeah, we have to have those checks and balances for when we lose sight of what really matters, because we're human beings and we do that. Absolutely. As we go to the next text, you're also going to see some parallels with this, right? Drashot El Ami is a later text, 19th, 20th century, says that justice alone is not enough, because there are many types of justice, just as there are many kinds of truth. Boy, do we see that in our society, right? Every regime has its own justice. The Torah, therefore, stresses, justice, justice, you shall pursue, namely the Musar ethic of justice, where both the means and the ends are just. Both the means and the ends are just. So this gets back directly to what Misty, you raised about the Canaanite people and how the Israelites were to come into the land, and also what you raised, Rabbi Catherine, a few minutes ago, right? And we're going to see that come up. One more text along this lines, right? Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Sifta, say that 3 times fast. He said, with justice, you shall pursue justice. Even the pursuit of justice must employ only just means and not falsehood. So let's pause for a second here to ask if we agree with this. Do you agree that justice fails to be justice if we acquire it through unjust means?
That's really a tough one.
That's interesting. Well, if you require it through unjust means, it is, why did you require it? And then what did you do with it? Maybe you shouldn't have stolen that piece of paper, but on the other hand, maybe it entirely illuminates what somebody thinks or wants to do. It's that, does the end justify the means?
Exactly.
Oh, Michael, you're muted. Can you unmute so we can hear you?
I sure. So in these times that we live in, I'm just thinking that for certain, police officers, that their job is the pursuit of justice in our world. But if they rob or steal or beat up people and such like that, they're doing it in their pursuit of justice. They're acting in a wrong way, in an unethical, and I don't want to use the same word, but unjust way. This is what we see in our own times now. Not in a biblical sense.
Yeah, I mean, so let's think of real world examples. Like, can you think of an example of a time where it actually might be just to do something that is unjust?
I remember a World War II example. I don't know, Winston Churchill was faced with whether or not to bomb, knowing that a city was going to be bombed if certain action wasn't taken, and how desperate the alternative was. And that was really pretty dramatic. I don't remember all the details, but
And Pam, you put something in the chat. Can you talk about that? Or are you not able to unmute? She might not be able to say out loud, but she put in the chat.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
I
there you
just,
go.
I'm eating lunch and I didn't want you to hear me chewing. Well, this is what comes to my mind. I was horrified and fascinated with what happened with bin Laden. To me, that's what comes to mind when you ask that question. There's not much more I can say, but I put it as a question because I wonder.
Hmm.
I always
Anyone?
think-
Yeah.
I always think someone who talked about war. So we firebombed Dresden, which is really unjust. But there was an attempt to end the war. You know, you can look at that, but it's definitely unjust. You killed thousands of innocent people, civilians. So can you do that to end a war and achieve justice for everyone?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that, right?
We went through the same thing with Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
One of those cost benefit analyses.
Can you use an A-bomb to kill hundreds of thousands to end the war so you save the lives of our troops who would have to invade? Well, those are tough ones.
Yeah. And even just going back to personal questions that often might come up in different places, right? If someone is starving and has no access to food, is it wrong for them to steal a loaf of bread for their family? Right?
That's right. That was Les Miserables.
Exactly.
Right. Oh,
It's not a unique idea, certainly. There's many people who are arrested for doing just that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, like as Michael was bringing up, there are examples of someone justifying really wrong actions because they say, well, the ends justify the means. I can do whatever it is. And that could be so easily misguided. So it's really difficult territory here that we're going into. What does it really mean to do justice? It's not something that we can just say, oh, I do justice, right? It really requires us to look within ourselves at our actions and to delve deeply into each particular circumstance.
What is the saying in court? It's better for 10 criminals to go free than to put someone who has not done anything wrong in prison. The cop that's chasing somebody who's just done a burglary, shoots at somebody, I think the rules are you don't shoot. And let the guy go. But that's a judgment, and that's anyway. It's
and exactly what you're bringing up, Irv, right? It's a split-second judgment. And so how do we prepare for split-second judgments? I mean, that seems like an oxymoron, right? Preparing for a split-second judgment. There is no time to prepare. But part of the reason that we delve into Musar, part of the reason that we spend so much time thinking about these ethics is so that we can really practice thinking through, like, what do I do in different scenarios, and think that through deeply so that perhaps if we're in a moment where we have to make a split-second decision, some of what we've studied and we've worked on actually comes through in our actions. So essentially, that's what we've been doing every Thursday as we've been studying Torah. We've been really preparing ourselves, and it's a lifelong pursuit. It's not something, oh, we're done after this Torah season is over, and after we're done with this Musar Torah commentary. It's not, okay, done that, I'm good now. Like, obviously, that's not true. But hopefully, it helps us on our journey. So let's bring in a small piece from the commentary this week, written by Justice Annabelle Imbertuck, who said, the double exhortation, justice, justice, you shall pursue, could not be more forceful. Moreover, this command is addressed to the communal you. It does not apply. It applies not only to the judges, but also to every member of the community, including succeeding generations. Right. We can't delegate this responsibility. This responsibility is on every single one of us. So let's go back to the text a little bit more. This is just a few verses after Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Does anyone want to read this? And where it has the Hebrew words, you could just say God or Adonai, whatever you'd prefer.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Michael.
You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God is giving you.
Okay, so if we look at the greater context here of these words, right? Easier said than done. You shall not judge unfairly. Okay, well, what does that mean? You shall show no partiality. Okay, that can be hard, right? Because we know that there's all different sorts of biases that we might not even be aware of that are just a part of everyday culture. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes. So when you read these words, it might make sense on paper, but when we have specific examples, it can get a lot more complicated, can't it?
This is like a prescription, the way I'm reading it, like the last sentence, from God saying, okay, we led you out of bondage and whatever, and into the promised land. And that's like, but you need to realize and act each and every moment, if you can, of every day, that you, in order to thrive in the land that God gives you. It's like, maybe that's not the right word, but I see it in a sense like a sort of like a prescription for the life going forward.
Yeah. If you do not pursue justice, it is not possible for you to fully thrive and for you to really occupy the land that God's giving you. You can't do that without justice. It's hard work, but it actually isn't possible to do it without that. It's a really powerful statement right there.
Yeah.
It says you may thrive. I mean, you may pursue, and you just don't give up, realizing that perfection is never going to. As long as everyone has free will, and we all do, we're going to have our biases, and we're going to do things we really shouldn't do to stay right on the straight and narrow. But as long as you're pursuing it, I mean, and I think you recognize that in people when we make our judgments about how people live and what their life is about, as much as you can figure out, you can sense this activity in their lives. I think maybe character might be another word that you would assign to somebody. So many of the heroes in my life, they're ordinary people, but they behave like this, and I look up to them.
So can you just say what that means, like this, that they were always in pursuit? Is that what you're saying?
Always in pursuit, and not that they were perfect or I agreed with them every step of the way, but I know that their end game was to lead us on a course of justice, or any other word you want to use. The people that I've been attracted to, as far as how I thought of them and where I made my own judgments, which is sometimes faulty, but I look for this as a character trait, somebody that always has the bigger picture in mind. When there's controversy somewhere and people are struggling and they get heated, and my mantra, don't get excited, comes into play. People talk past each other, and people that step up and say, wait a minute, let's take a break here. We both want the same end judgment. There's more about us alike than not alike. Let's start from there. Everybody's on even plane, and then but they're pushing in the right direction, over on the right direction. You just have to keep going for the better, because it's the only way to survive.
Thank you. Yes, Sandy, you wanted to add something.
Yes, I don't see the text, so I don't know, except that it looks to me from this that it's Adonai and it doesn't say Elohim. So it makes me wonder which Elohim is really the name for more of the justice for God and the judgmental God, and the Adonai is the compassionate attribute. So is it saying then in a way that even though there's justice, there has to be compassion in this?
Yeah, it's interesting because the word deen is judgment, right? And that's like the far end of justice through like a Zohar kind of perspective, right? If we think about the Sephirot, for example, Deen is on one end and Chesed is on the other end. The Hebrew words here, I just brought this up, right? It's Adonai Elohecha. So it actually has both here.
Okay, then I understand that. Okay.
And down here, it's the same thing, Adonai Elohecha.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, Rabbi Catherine.
I'm thinking that the part a little bit further down is, I think this also challenges us to look at our own values. What is justice to me? What do I understand justice to be? What does this particular situation require? And it may require something that is way outside of my sphere of knowing anything about the person and the situation. I think it all challenges us to recognize and think about what our own prejudices are. How might I unjustly judge unfairly? What are my partialities? What are my temptations, which is the bribes piece? What is the disagreement? When does disagreement just flip over to something else entirely? And I think that going into the High Holy Days during Elul, this is a particularly cogent challenge that each of us looks at or can take the time to look at.
Yeah, and especially this year and going into an election and so many other pieces, right? Part of it is what does it mean to show no partiality, right? There are so many articles and books written. Jonathan Haidt, for example, who several years ago wrote a really, really beautiful, insightful, and also somewhat horrifying book about tribalism in our own way. That, if we see ourselves as being part of X group, then we want to go along with whatever X group says without necessarily really thinking it through and asking for ourselves, is that justice? Is that aligned with my values? And here this is saying, don't just do things because someone else tells you to do them. You, as an individual, need to truly pursue justice. And sometimes that means standing out and saying, no, I don't agree with you. This isn't right. So yeah, thank you so much.
I think
Yeah, Larry.
justice is also relative. People look at things differently. So what's justice to one is injustice to another, or something like that. So justice, I think that's what Catherine's saying a bit, is that justice is relative to who you are and what your situation is.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit
I
because
don't
I'm not
think
I'm not
no.
sure if that's true or not. What do people
No.
think about that?
I don't
I don't
agree with that, because
I don't either.
it's an ideal. It's that we should all strive for, and it's not what I think justice is, or you do, or the guy down the street, but whatever the word justice truly means to everyone, that's what we should strive for. And by doing so, we can, use the word thrive, not just, in a dollars and cents way, but in the way we should live our lives. So I don't think it's up to individuals to decide what justice is. That's why we had the January 6th problem, because of people's storming the Capitol. Anyway, I don't politely agree with what Larry just said, but that's just my opinion.
The reason I say that is that
No.
no one knows how hungry I am. No one knows how many meals that other person had. When you make that decision, you may be giving the necessary food to the person that doesn't really need it. So there's got to be some type of thing that's relative.
Well, so there's a little bit of a difference in language that I'm hearing here, right? So if we look at justice as a larger idea that is greater than any one human being,
That's right.
right? Then that's different from the circumstantial kind of piece that you're bringing in here. So we might not know the whole perspective of what is going on. And so we might think in our mind that we're doing something that's just, but we're actually wrong because we didn't have the whole picture. That's a matter of communication and being able to really understand and hear one another so that we can come to our shared value of what overall is just, which is that people have the necessities that they need to survive, right? That's a shared just value as opposed to the individual actions. So I think the way we're using language is just a little bit different, but that we don't actually disagree.
And that's what's good about your son doing debating. You hear all the sides.
Right. It's like an elephant, right? If you have an elephant and people have their eyes blindfolded and you're all in different parts of the elephant, one person touches the trunk and they get one idea of what this object is. Another one touches the foot of the elephant and it's hard and it's strong and it's not moving and it's small. One person touches the tail, gets a different idea. One person touches the side. Everyone has a different idea of what an elephant is. But until we listen to one another and we can hear about this object from different perspectives, none of us actually know what an elephant is.
Right.
But we have laws that we all must live by in our society. And that's what maybe separates, civilization from chaos. And whether we agree with the laws or not, and how it applies to us in our own individual ways, we still have to abide by these laws.
Mm-hmm.
And justice is certainly one of them.
Yeah, Misty, you had your hand raised before. Did you want to say something? And then Marla?
Because I was sort of thinking about what Larry was saying and what Michael, and I was thinking, the concept of justice is something that we have in our Western civilization based on Judaism, that was brought forth in the Tanakh, this whole concept of justice. And so it underlies what we believe in Western society. Not necessarily does that hold true throughout all parts of the world, which I think is sort of where Larry may have been going with his concept of defining justice. We're having a discussion based on our understanding as it underlines us in Western civilization. I mean, we look at our courthouses. It used to be we had the 10 Commandments and God there, right? I mean, that's sort of changing now too. But that, I think, really affects our appreciation and this discourse on justice and social justice. You don't see that everywhere.
Yeah, because it gets to what the values are underneath it. And
Oh,
values
yeah.
do change culture to culture. So it's a fair point. Yeah, Marla.
Michael made me think of the other piece of this that we started out with, which was the notion of compassion and justice. So that if the rule is, like Michael, you're suggesting, the rule is don't steal, okay? Don't steal food. And everybody needs to follow that. But as you then pursue justice in dealing with that person, and you do find out that the theft was to feed a hungry child versus somebody who was stealing steaks out of the, prime restaurant on Western, for their own, whatever. I just feel like maybe that's the other piece of it. But I think it's challenging. And I think it's personal. And I think it's about humanity.
Yeah, I think that also goes back to what Sandy was saying too, right? Is judgment is very, very rigid. Here is the law, you follow it, period. You don't do it, you get in trouble. Chesed is, oh, you're a human being and you have this really tough circumstance. I want to understand you. And perhaps tzedek is a coming together of both of those two things. Yes, we have laws. Yes, we have rules, but we also see the humanity of individuals and have to recognize that sometimes the rules are not actually just after all.
Right.
I want to bring in a little bit of a commentary that Sarah Bassin wrote, and this is actually a blog for Reform Judaism. Does anyone want to read this aloud?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Thank you.
These 3 verses indicate a greater concern about the misuse of mercy than of justice. Misuse of mercy.
And the 3 verses, by the way, sorry, Larry, the 3 verses are the ones that we just were talking about, leading into Tzedek, Tirdof. Go ahead.
Text recognizes that we may be too lenient and overlook the need for justice on account of a favored relationship, or more crassly, money. Excessive mercy can destroy a person and society just as easily as fanatical justice. When Mussar literature speaks of the trait of mercy, it cautions against its overuse because we may allow the guilty to follow the evil prompting of his heart. Such pity despoils him and deprives him of life in the world to come. Justice is no less divine than mercy. We as humans just need some extra help to know what to use when. I like the last line. I'm not sure the other lines I can understand even.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, right? Because essentially what Rabbi Bassin is saying is that someone could kind of tug at the heartstrings and say, well, I'm in a really bad circumstance, so I should be able to get away with this action or that action. I shouldn't have consequences. You should feel bad for me because of what it is that I'm going through. And that can go to an extreme where we actually lose sight of what is just because we're trying to be so understanding that we actually fall into a trap where we're placating some really awful actions. And so she's pushing back on that and saying, sometimes the right thing to do is to actually say, no, I don't understand. What you did is not okay. And you have to take responsibility for your actions. It's not easy.
Yes. We need extra help.
Right. And that's why that last line is so poignant. We as humans need extra help to know what to use and when. Sometimes we need mercy. Sometimes we need stronger deen, judgment. How do we know where to use which one?
I think that's the challenge when it comes to justice, because there's a lot of times where we want to show some mercy for the people who've committed something. But we also, there's the time where we really need to make we need to show some power, some strength.
I think a practical example of that was the 3-strike law. That's proven to be, meant to be that it was supposedly going to deter serious crime, but it wound up putting people with minor infractions that happened to fall in the felony category in jail for an inordinate amount of time. It proved to be impractical. So it took the judgment of a judge who had latitude for sentencing out of his hands. I see that all the time in the newspaper. I said, I didn't want to give this guy 10 years, but my guidance is I have to give him 10 years imprisonment. And so where the original idea was, if we threaten people who we think might think twice before doing a particular thing, that they might get 10 years, deter crime. But it turns out it doesn't work that way. And so you can't have compassion where you have no leeway. So you can't tie somebody's hands and then say you're not compassionate. So it's a pretty tough subject.
Yeah, it's so hard to find the right way to do that, especially in a society at large. Like, it's hard enough as an individual to figure out how do we toe that line. But if we're thinking about a justice system with so many different personalities, it becomes really almost impossible, but we still have to keep pursuing it because it is one of the most important things to have a just society. Oh, I have a few more texts. I thought I had, okay. Clearly we're not going through all of this today. I know you're shocked that I prepared more than we actually need, because that never happens. Let's bring in a little bit more of Justice Annabelle Embertuck's words. She writes, every member of the community, including succeeding generations, has an obligation to pursue justice in their own interactions with others. Before judging another person, we must be aware of our tendency to stereotype based on the other's external appearance. Likewise, implicit bias derived from our own life experiences should be acknowledged. In the Musar tradition, judging others favorably and giving them the benefit of the doubt should be our default. We are all made B'Tselem Elohim in God's image. When we view another as a whole person, we should search for and acknowledge the redeeming qualities. Just as God shows compassion when we fall short of the mark, so should we temper our judgments of another filled with compassion. For those situations where we find ourselves baffled, Shoftim teaches us to seek out a trusted friend for advice. So to acknowledge that all of us have biases. We might think we know what is tzedek, what is just, but there might be a piece of that elephant that we haven't seen before. There might be something there that we need some help to be able to understand. And in the meantime, it teaches us, give the benefit of the doubt. Dan l'chaf suchut. Give someone that, just that little act of grace that, just as we would want people to see us as having the best of intentions, when in doubt, we can do that for other people as well. A couple of other quick things to go through. One is there's this text, short while later, a person shall be put to death only on the testimony of 2 or more witnesses. No one shall be put to death on the testimony of a single witness. Let the hands of the witness be the first to put thee condemned to death, followed by the hands of the people. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. So essentially, the way this is put out, and this is a longer conversation than the 5 minutes we have left, but there's a lot of other commentary here that basically makes capital punishment nearly impossible. Because the way the Talmud then goes to talk about it is, not only do you need to have the testimony of two or more witnesses who will come forward themselves and say exactly what they saw, but you need the person to actually have acknowledged that what they were doing was wrong before they committed the act in that moment. It doesn't say so here, but in the Talmud, it expounds upon it. So one person is never in the position of being able to be the sole judge and arbiter of what happens, especially when it comes to capital punishment. Okay, let's just look at this one other commentary. When the advent of the intranet and social media, we tend to hear only what we want to hear and then share that information electronically with friends. Such reactive judgment without further investigation and deliberation can be at best unfair and at worst defamatory, causing irreparable damage. This tendency to rush to judgment is most apparent in the cult of the personality phenomenon. We either sanctify or demonize public personalities using unverified facts. Our children are especially vulnerable to cyberbullying, which can cause harm on the online reputations of everyone involved. Each of us has the ability to counteract the current trend toward reactive judgment by adopting a slow-to-judge attitude towards others. During my tenure on the bench, this practice helped me to become a better judge. It could have been so easy for the Torah to just say, someone says they do something wrong, let's punish them and call them accountable. But to the contrary, it's saying, no, there needs to be huge checks and balances so that we can actually confirm what's going on. And yet in our society today, that's not what happens, right? Someone says something is unfair, one outlet of news runs a whole story, whether that is based on fact or not. And it brings up emotions and feelings of a large group of people. This is calling us to do better.
My daughter just brought that up today. She teaches teenage girls dance, my daughter here in Oregon. And she said, kids are under so much stress, partially because of social media, partially because of what's happening at schools, partially what's happening in their families. And it's really not a good feeling.
Right. And if during the High Holy Day season, we're told everyone is capable of change, we're told you make a mistake, take responsibility for it, learn from it, and move forward and do better. If we're in a world where someone is demonized and belittled and written off just because they make one mistake, we're not really living into those values, and we're certainly not living into justice. It is a hard time to be a teenager. There's no doubt about it. It's also a hard time to be a human, I think, right now. A lot of us have been through a whole lot. There's a lot more text here. However, it is now 1:58, so clearly we're not going to be able to go into all of it. I encourage you to look through these texts at a later time. The only last piece I'm going to bring in is this one by Andrew Mandel. So he asks, what will it take for all of us to pursue the work of tzedek, the tireless work of relationship building, of learning, of phone calls and protests, of speaking truth to power, and of reflecting on our approach with consistency? It is in this spirit that I invite you, your family, your friends, and your networks to join a new international initiative, the Tzedek Box. The tzedek box is like a tzedakah box, but instead of coins, you put a slip of paper inside every time you confront an injustice. If you speak out against sexism in your workplace, if you call your senator's office about criminal justice reform, if you donate to register disenfranchised voters, write it down, not for self-congratulation, but for a chance to pause, to reflect, perhaps to seek divine partnership in the daunting work that you are tackling. In this mini diary entry, you might share how you're feeling, what you're realizing, and what you want to do next. Then, once a year, you'll open your box as a form of sacred accountability and as a chance to take stock of what you did and where you might want to redouble your efforts in the future. We live in a world where there is so much injustice, and sometimes it can feel really overwhelming. What can I as an individual do? But perhaps if every time we did something, we could actually write it down in this way, we can realize that actually every single one of us truly can make a difference. So just one idea there.
Oh,
Just a quick word. I was taught that tzedakah not only meant, anyway, it was taught as a requirement and not as a something you do willingly. It is absolutely required.
Yeah, it's an obligation. It's not something.
That's the
Yeah.
word. Yeah.
It's not like charity, for example, where, oh, I'm going to do something nice. It's our obligation to one another as sacred human beings. So any final thoughts or questions as we close up for today?
You know, I live in an area where people look at tents under a freeway and totally one way, and others look at it another way. You know, look what they brought themselves to, and the other one is, in other words, it's their got themselves in that fix. Why do we have to fix it? And the others say, why have we put those folks in the situation where they're in that fix? And there's a big gulf in between.
There is, but what I'm hearing in both of those statements is a lot of us and them language. And what would it be like to have conversations where it's not us and them, but rather it's we?
Rabbi, I thought, probably mistakenly, but I thought that giving to charity in Judaism was an obligation, not a choice.
Yes. And that's what Irv brought up too.
Oh,
It
okay.
absolutely is.
Okay, all right, yeah.
And it's not necessarily how much is being given, because we all have abilities to give in different ways, right?
Yeah.
But that all of us are playing a role.
Okay.
There actually is a tradition of every single Friday night before Shabbat starts, giving a little bit to tzedakah, whether that be a nickel or that be $100, right? All of us have different abilities to do different things, but to be able to go into the holy day knowing that we did that last mitzvah. A mitzvah also doesn't mean good deed. It means an obligation. We did that last mitzvah so that we can head into this day of rest with that fresh on our hearts. So just a few things to think about within our own practice as we all seek to pursue a more just world. So thank you so much for all your comments, all of your thoughts here. I encourage you to look at the text sheet and all of the different things we didn't get to cover today, to read that commentary if you haven't yet. And we'll come back next week and we'll start with next week's Torah portion.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Cassi.
Rabbi.
thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.